Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of Lunch Hour Live. I'm Sue O'Connell. Wow, man, starting a family is both exciting and terrifying, right? And soon-to-be parents often worry if their baby will be born full-term and healthy and whether they can handle all the new responsibilities of having a family. But for the 10% of U.S. adults who struggle with infertility, the road to parenthood is often stopped by the hurdle of simply getting pregnant. Nova's latest documentary, Fighting for Fertility, explores the social and biological barriers of fertility and what you can do about them. From systematic racism to IVF to falling sperm counts, this film follows the journeys of people navigating the challenges of starting a family. And joining me today on Lunch Hour Live, our director and producer of Fighting for Fertility, Larkin McPhee, and fertility physician at the Nevada Fertility Institute, Dr. Cindy Duke. Larkin and Dr. Duke, welcome to Lunch Hour Live. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Sue. It's great to be here.
Hi, Sue. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for joining us so much. I'm glad we're talking about this topic. Lots of people don't want to talk about it. They shy away from it because it's a vulnerable thing to talk about, to discuss infertility. Larkin, why this film now? What drew you to this topic?
Well, some friends came to me with this idea and they saw a need because they had been on a 12-year journey. And so I thought this was, a film, a topic that people don't talk about. They're not comfortable. I've worked on films about depression, and what I found out was that there were many similarities in terms of the pain that people go through on their journeys and a sense of brokenness. And I like to bring things out into the open and help people, understand topics better and have experts like Dr. Cindy Duke to really guide us. So I was very motivated to work on this film.
Dr. Duke, I grew up with Our Bodies, Ourselves, and actually thought at this point in my life, at 59, I knew pretty much everything there was to know about fertility and infertility and reproduction, and I learned so much from this and so much about what I didn't know. I'm also embarrassed to admit that there were things I didn't know that I learned by watching Keeping Up with the Kardashians during Kim's struggle to get pregnant. And that wasn't that long ago either. But learning that 10% of U.S. adults struggle with infertility, that seems like such a huge number to me. Are we experiencing a fertility crisis, or is this another one of those situations where it was something we didn't talk about and now we're more comfortable talking about it, so the number seems bigger?
We're definitely experiencing a fertility crisis, and there are a number of factors that go into play with that. Certainly, in terms of those of us born with ovaries and uteri, we're choosing to start our families at a later age, which is part of it because our egg numbers decline with age, and the quality of those eggs also decline with age. And so when you couple that with us, most of us choosing to start our families later, and then you couple it with all the other socio-demographic pressures, it's a crisis indeed, and one that needs to be talked about. Yes, people struggled with infertility 20 years ago, 40 years ago, 60 years ago. Absolutely. It didn't just appear overnight, but we also now have a lot of technology to help us overcome many aspects of it. But with those come new hurdles that we have to address as well.
Well, as we talk about, one of the things that people are doing regarding planning to have children is waiting to have children, and then that leads some women to freeze their eggs so they can get pregnant later. But what happens if you freeze your eggs too late in the game? For Bridget Adams, she found out the hard way.
When Bridget Adams turned 39, she decided to freeze her eggs. She became an early adopter of egg vitrification, a technology that can dramatically improve the preservation of a woman's eggs and potentially her future fertility.
So in the early days of IVF, freezing technology was not very good. We were using slow freeze methods where you would lower the temperature gradually over a programmed period of time, and at a point you would reach a place where ice crystal formation happened, and if the ice crystal happened in the middle of your egg, it would harm the egg. Vitrification is You basically take all the water molecules out of the cell, replace it with cryoprotectants, so that when you freeze, you don't make ice crystals. So then you don't damage cytoskeleton and organelles in the cell that its survival depends on. So now you can freeze and store infinite amount of time with no harm or damage.
In 2009, 475 women froze their eggs. In 2018, more than 13,000 did so. Despite its growing popularity, egg vitrification is expensive. Most people who participate are white and with means. The hormone therapy used in ovary stimulation can result in a range of side effects, including fatigue, nausea, and abdominal pain. Back to Bridget. As a woman ages, not only does the quantity of her eggs decline, but so does the health of her eggs.
When I froze my eggs, I thought 11 sounded like this great number. Of those 11, 9 defrosted successfully. From those 9 eggs, 6 fertilized. And at that point, I thought, wow, I went from 11 to 6 in almost a 24-hour period, and I started to get very anxious. Then the next call I got was, of those 6, only 1 has made it to day 5. And that was crushing. That genetically normal embryo was implanted. I was pregnant for 36 hours. And then I went for my second blood test, and the embryo had stopped growing. So I went from 11 eggs to 9 to 6 to 1 to no live birth. And I think I still remember, vividly the day I found out my eggs didn't work. I don't want anyone else to go through that if they can do something proactively sooner and freeze their eggs when they're healthier, or start thinking about having a child when they're younger.
Stories, not all of them made them to the film. You can watch that clip and others on Nova's YouTube and Facebook page. Also, if you're watching us at home, please bring us your questions and we'll try and get them to our panel. Larkin, I was so moved by so many of these stories that folks shared that were really, really trying to start their family but just couldn't. How do you get folks to feel safe enough to authentically and honestly share their experiences with you and then with us?
It is about trust. And I think I've loved working with PBS because I think we're the most trusted brand in television. And, sometimes I show past work to people to show that, we're really interested in their story, and, their driving motivation is to help people. And so that, I think, alleviates their pain a little bit. And I find that when people are willing to say yes, that is largely the motivator.
Dr. Duke, another thing I learned watching the Fighting for Fertility was that I knew some men struggled with infertility, but I had no idea that men struggled with fertility at the same rate as women. Right? We always talk about women and carrying the child, getting pregnant. Has this male infertility always been a problem, or has this too gotten worse over the last few decades?
It has always been a problem, but it hasn't been identified as a problem in terms of the conversation. And so, yes, the burden of childbearing and family building has primarily fallen on those born with ovaries and uteruses. That said, we are seeing declines in sperm counts if you compare them to 15, 20 years ago. But we've always known that, it takes 2 to tango, right? You need eggs, but you also need sperm. And we're learning so much more about the role of sperm in not only achieving pregnancy, but the role even in miscarriage. We've long been leading people to think that pregnancy really, once you achieve pregnancy, that was the end of the sperm's role with embryo creation. But we see now that the DNA from the sperm has its own role to play. And so I'm really excited about this project. And I was very grateful that Larkin, approached me to participate, because it's something we need to talk about. It's something we need to change even the educational paradigm around reproduction about, because because I don't think, when I think back to high school, that we actually had a conversation about sperm or male fertility. We're not talking enough about fertility when it comes to eggs either, but we definitely did not speak about pregnancy and male fertility's role in pregnancy.
I want to talk more about the challenges of fertility.
Right.
Yeah, please do.
I was just going to say one thing that was interesting for me to learn was about young women. You know, they go see OB-GYNs. What do young men do? They don't see doctors for a long time. And so that's another hopeful part of this message. And Dr. Duke really hit this home for me. This idea of like a fertility checkup when you're younger, and the doctors have to be more primed for this. The pediatricians, your OB, and then maybe the fertility doctor. But that just was an interesting observation, I thought.
Right. So many people, as I learned, in my personal life as well as in the film, get so far down the line in trying to start a family and find out they had biological challenges, which could have been discovered earlier, saving them both heartache and time and money. But Dr. Duke, one of the challenges to fertility is also social barriers, and the challenges. Not only are we experiencing in America the high mortality rate for Black and brown women who give birth here in the United States of America, but also I learned about the structural inequality and racism that impacts fertility for Black and African American women. How does your zip code, where you live, impact your fertility?
Well, where you live literally determines how far you are from your clinic. And in so much as I'm not proud to admit it, the majority of fertility clinics are located in more affluent zip codes, more affluent zip codes. And so what that means is for certain populations in our country, it's not even a question of, I need to build in 20 minutes commute to get to the clinic. It could be another state. It could be 6 hours away. And so if you're struggling with fertility, you're struggling with a taboo topic, if you're needing time off from work, it's all these layers are making it even more difficult for you to actually access the care you need. And then if you're able to access cost, then becomes a major factor. There are some health insurances that cover some aspects of fertility, but the other thing is most people aren't even aware of how to shop their health insurance to determine if they have coverage. And so it's a big, big issue. And access is something we need to work on as a first world country, a developed country. If we compare access in our country to our counterparts, when it comes to fertility care, we're lacking, and we're lagging far behind.
Larkin, we're looking at the census data that just came out and talking to demographers about the drop in birth rates in the United States, which across the board are just bigger than they've been in decades. And I'm wondering, what I didn't hear discussed was fertility issues in all the conversations we're having about legitimate issues being talked about, obviously, but missing was fertility. Is it surprising to you still that this is a discussion that is unique and new to be having?
Do you mean this? You mean about the drop in fertility right now in our country?
In terms of fertility in general, when it comes to talking about the future, the economic future of our country, when it comes to the dropping birth rates.
Right. Well, I think Dr. Shauna Swan in the film has a book that just came out called Countdown to Zero about endocrine disrupting hormones. Well, and this is something, she did this massive study, meta study, and states that a man's sperm rate, his sperm count today is half that of his grandfather's. So I think that's pretty shocking information that's getting out there now. And she says there's no bottom to this drop. And so what's going on? And then with the pandemic, I'm just imagining it's socioeconomic, it's insecurity and so forth. But I do think we really have to pay attention to our environment and how it is stressing us out, in the African American community, but in all communities. And the chemicals are everywhere. There's measures we can take to protect ourselves. So I'm just happy that, more is coming out now about this.
There's good news in the film as well. Science is giving couples struggling with trying to get pregnant, the gift of some groundbreaking technologies like IVF and artificial insemination. But it's officially gone the extra mile, making it possible for two men to make a baby. Let's take a look.
Exactly what I was going to say. Yeah.
How do two men make a baby?
Hormone treatment can suppress the reproductive system. So for example, a transgender man who is taking testosterone will experience a cessation of menses, so periods will stop coming, and that's actually an intended consequence of the treatment. But in addition, it will suppress the ovaries so that he is no longer ovulating. When they come off of testosterone, there are reports that the menses will return.
Testosterone really acts to the ovulatory system the same way that any hormonal birth control that stops ovulation and menstruation impacts the system. It just hits pause on the sort of egg maturing factory. And when you go off of testosterone, as I did, it takes a few months, and then the egg maturing factory kicks back into gear and you ovulate and menstruate just as you had before.
There have been reports of pregnancies, but what we don't know is if a person has been on testosterone for a long period of time, is that return of ovarian function going to actually occur?
If you want to see the belly, I'm actually wearing a whole...
Tristan had been taking testosterone for 12 years before trying to get pregnant. After experiencing a miscarriage, he soon became pregnant with Leo.
Gigantic giant. And Leo looks so much like you that people just assume that I wasn't involved at all.
They do assume that we had a surrogate and just used my sperm for that. We did have a surrogate. We did use my sperm.
It was me. I was my own surrogate. How do you navigate pregnancy as a transgender man? Maybe you felt conflicted about or even negative about having breasts. But now, that's being used to nourish a human. Maybe you felt conflicted about having a uterus to begin with. Now it's being used to grow a person. You're building a family.
Larkin, I was so struck by those comments at the end because it's so groundbreaking to me that if we had conversations like this with kids, with teens and middle schoolers about the marvels of their body, how they all might feel about their bodies, knowing that there were opportunities for them in their future to live their authentic life and still have a different, more loving relationship back and forth between their body and them. You work so hard to include so many different points of view and experiences in fighting for fertility. Where'd you find this couple?
Well, Tristan, I went to a conference, the American Society for Reproductive Medicine in Philadelphia, and met many interesting experts, said hello to people, and followed up with an expert at NYU Langone and had a couple conversations, and she mentioned his name to me, and I looked him up and reached out, and Tristan and I went back and forth, and that's how that came about. And then his family became involved, and they are the most loving family, adopting these children that would have gone into foster home. Just a remarkable story, I thought.
Dr. Duke, how often do doctors actually advise transgender people to freeze their eggs or their sperm before transitioning? I know it's happening more now, but it still seems like it's a rather unique experience, is it?
It is a unique experience. Now, we are, as a specialty, reproductive endocrine and infertility, emphasizing and encourage that healthcare professionals, so clinicians, whether it be physicians, nurses, physician assistants, who are working with transgender patients, talk to them about their future fertility and their options, particularly if they're approaching their gender affirming surgery or about to start hormone therapy. I think, for a lot of our patients who are undergoing either gender affirming treatments or surgeries, there is just so much emotional pressure involved with getting to that point that if someone doesn't bring it up, they may not have heard that they have these options and that they're so much more accessible now. We also have states that are even also mandating health coverage for this. And so it's really a question of raising awareness. And this is something that I enjoyed about the film is it's an opportunity to reach large audiences and talk about this subject that many people are just unaware of, including those within the trans community.
I want to remind folks watching on YouTube and Facebook that you can send your questions our way in the comment box. Larkin, the other part of the film which was so touching to me was the delicate balance that communities of faith have to incorporate and staying positive and the positivity when they're still struggling with infertility, but they're not getting a lot of information about the infertility issues within their own communities. Like just telling someone, be positive, it'll happen, isn't always the best thing to be talking about. But you really spotlighted the stories of communities really shepherding the experience and support systems for people to work towards their road towards fertility.
Absolutely. And I think Reverend Stacey Edwards Dunn did something very special when she founded Fertility for Colored Girls, because there was nothing out there. And, you know, Tiffany was the person who said, I went into this clinic and I saw Black and brown people like myself. I mean, really for the first time. And I heard that a lot in my research. So I was very happy to learn that. And then, you know, this idea that let's just pray. And we'll, you know, to a baby. Well, what's so special about Reverend Stacey that Tiffany remarked on was, this is a very, you know, pious woman, but she said, you know, God made the science too. And that blending is just beautiful and allowed Tiffany to move forward on her journey and have support. And that kind of community where they can hold each other up is what it takes often. And I think that we're hoping to do that in the LGBTQ community, because the stigma is as high. I mean, I was stunned to learn how high the suicide rate is in that community. So of course these young children aren't thinking about babies. They're just thinking about getting through, you know, the transition. So I think the idea is to let people know they're not alone. And we're all there everyone's supporting everyone. You know, we have to find these clinics and communities.
Dr. Drew, do you think that this is a moment for the medical community? You know, over the past, you know, the pandemic has certainly shown us things that have been hiding in plain sight that now are unavoidable and factual, and the racial reckoning that we've been long overdue in going through. And, you know, the film highlights any number of challenges that communities, LGBTQ, single women, people of color have in interacting in a trustworthy way with the medical community. Are you feeling that message is being heard and the medical institutions are beginning to respond appropriately?
I definitely have to admit that the message is really amplified and I love it. Do I think most academic institutions and medical institutions are responding appropriately? Not yet. More of them are responding, yes, but you know, a lot of it is performative, right? And for the patient, what really matters is the action, the outcome. Is it really changing for them? Is that interaction changing? Is that inclusiveness actually occurring? Are they feeling less marginalized? And we have a long way to go there. I think the fact that it's amplified is great because it's more in their faces, so they have to hear it. But it's more than just acknowledging that it's being said. Now we need to take action as a medical community. We need to get out there and educate ourselves, educate the community. It's not enough to say, yes, you know, the Black maternal mortality rates are high. They've been high for well over 20 years. In fact, it's only gotten higher over the last 20 years. So what are we doing to finally reverse it? And part of reversing that is acknowledging the role we as healthcare professionals play with that. When it comes to talking about our LGBTQIA families, it's not enough to say we know we have patients who identify as such. Is what are you doing as a medical community to ensure that when they enter your clinic, you are informed and educated enough to deliver them full spectrum care, including talking about fertility and family building options, as opposed to making assumptions that they must not want families or they must not be intending to become parents if they're seeking services. And so my hope is films like this one, the amplified voices around the country and around the world are going to make a change. But I really do believe the biggest change is going to be with a new generation coming in. And as we rise in the ranks, we make meaningful generational change.
So well said, Doctor. Larkin, so many great interviews and moments. Is there one that stands out to you, or is there a fact you didn't know that you were like, oh boy, I didn't know this?
Well, I guess I'd just like to mention Cassie and Zach, who opened the film. I met them at my husband's Christmas party. I was almost in tears within minutes of hearing their story, and said, can I call you if this film happens? And they said yes. So they put their trust in me. And as viewers will see, their story is not ended. And but she is now pregnant. And I am just praying for her every day, because they have fought so long and so hard. And to go through this and expose themselves and know that when the film was done, that there was nothing, it was just really hard. They were still in a place of struggle. So that really has, been touching. I mean, they all are, but they're in my backyard and I'm in close touch and just hoping for the very best with her pregnancy.
Dr. Duke, I know when I was building my family, one of the best bits of advice I got was that if you want to be a parent, you will find a way to be a parent. It may not be the road that you take. It may not be the way that you see it happening, but it will happen if you want it to happen in some way. Do you have any parting words of advice for people who might be suffering with infertility right now?
Well, I love what you said, and that's the key, right? There is a way, there are options. It's seeking them out. And, that was why I love the part about prayer as well. And I do a lot of outreach, for example, to churches and religious organizations, because prayer is amazing support. But I think we've spent a lot of time telling people just wait and it'll happen. But it does take some intentional action, some active seeking out of your options. And indeed, there's so many options. If you are intending to become a parent, there's really isn't a word anymore. It's how.
Larkin, how about you? What's one thing you hope folks take away from the documentary?
I think that we have lots of expectations about our journeys with families. And I think the most important thing is that I observed many people crossing red lines in the sand that they had drawn for themselves. And that when they got to the other side, at least in Bridget Adams' case, she said she is so happy. Her journey turned out, there's no way you could have ever predicted what would happen. And she said, I think it was all meant to be. And the Reverend Stacey Edwards Dunn sums it up beautifully in just saying, you will get to that miracle baby. Your path is not deficient. It just may be different.
Well said again. People can watch Fighting for Fertility over at pbs.org. Thank you, Larkin. Thank you, Dr. Duke. Great to meet both of you. Well done, and I appreciate you taking time to join us today. Thanks to everybody watching on Facebook and YouTube. We'll be back next Thursday with a look inside the Philly DA. That's a documentary series that takes viewers into the office of Philadelphia District Attorney Larry Krasner as he and his team work to transform the criminal justice system from the inside. I'm Sue O'Connell. Stay safe. I'll see you next week.